going to learn about pattern and rhythm. You're going to need your sketchbook, your colored pencils, and a pencil to complete this activity. This note is going to be primarily visual examples with a few notations. I will tell you when you need to write something down, so don't feel like you need to copy all the information within the presentation. When it comes to repetition in art, repetition can be used to create a lot of interesting effects. So it can create just visual interest on its own. It gives a suggestion of movement. And by repeating something over and over again, it creates a calm sense and creates a sense of harmony within an artwork or unity within an artwork. The unit itself that is being repeated is called a motif. The word motif can be deceiving though, because sometimes we speak of a pattern that has similar motifs. So we almost refer to it as a theme. For instance, a nautical motif would include perhaps an anchor, a sailboat, some waves, a buoy, because they are all objects that have the same or similar themes, being a nautical theme. So we could refer to that as a nautical motif, and we could speak to the individual units as being motifs. The motifs themselves can be copied and arranged in different ways to create different examples of pattern and adjust the rhythm. What you see here is an example from art history. These are moai, which are very prehistoric carvings that exist on Easter Island. And if you look at the kind of information it shows here on the slide, they're very large in size. They're double the size of an average human. And to see just one on its own might not be all that impressive. It's not like the pyramids that are gigantic. Okay, they're double the size of a human. But when you repeat the motif of these monolithic structures, it becomes very overwhelming. It has this visual impact through the use of repetition. This is another more current example. So you can see here this was completed in 2001. I'm just trying to figure out where to put my camera bubble. There we go. And what we see here is actually a play on the idea of a traditional monument where a figure would be placed on top and everyone would look up to that figure in admiration. Well, now you see all the figures placed on the bottom. And by repeating the figures, it really gives a sense of unity of all of these motifs working together to bring your attention to the fact that they're holding up this massive structure. In this example, it's kind of cool. It's kind of like a reversal of power. As opposed to one person being put up on a pedestal, we're seeing perhaps the people, the real true heroes that work super hard underneath to get those people in that position of power. Again, this message wouldn't be very clear without the use of repetition by repeating the male and female figures. When it comes to pattern, as I mentioned, we have a repetition of a motif. And the pattern itself doesn't have to be regular or consistent. It could be very irregular, very chaotic, as long as we see some form of the motif repeating. So keep that in mind. As long as the motif repeats in some way, that counts as a pattern. Rhythm, the simplest way to think about rhythm is the spaces that exist between the motifs. So we see this white space here that is existing between the two purple rectangles. That is part of the rhythm, or this space, or this space. And depending on how the spaces are arranged, it changes the rhythm. If you think in music, when music notes are arranged, they have, for a very regular beat, there's a specific space or a specific pause that needs to happen between the notes, and that affects the rhythm. It's the same thing in art. The larger the space or the smaller the space between the motifs will affect the way the viewer takes in the artwork, and it changes that visual rhythm. So let's compare pattern and rhythm. First of all, we're going to talk about different examples. So this is the time when you're going to need to write some things down. So open this up to a new page in your sketchbook, and you should be able to finish this note within one page of your sketchbook. So just keep these examples small. This is just for your reference. I won't be marking your notes, but you need to understand this terminology. So the best way to do it is draw some examples and write down what you're doing. So label those examples. So I'd like you to write down regular, rhythm, and pattern. We have a regular pattern being created by the repetition of this we'll call it turquoise rectangle. So it's the exact same motif being repeated here, and then here, and then here. So it's a regular pattern because it's the exact same motif being repeated in a very predictable manner. Likewise, the spaces that exist between our rectangle motifs are regular. The spaces are very uniform. It's the same width, it's the same height that exists between each of these rectangle motifs. So therefore we have a regular rhythm and a regular pattern. If at any point in time you need to pause the video to draw your examples, please feel free to do so. Here we have a regular rhythm. You'll notice the space between the circles is uniform. It's the same space. But the pattern is irregular. We have all different colors being used here. It is not predictable. It's hard to say what color comes next, but there's enough repetition in the motifs to establish it as a pattern, because although the colors are irregular, the shapes create a regular motif that is in fact repeating. So again, regular rhythm, the spaces remain the same. Irregular pattern because each motif is a little bit different. If I asked you to say, continue to draw this pattern, it might take you longer than our previous example. Regular rhythm, regular pattern, it's easy to replicate. When we get into a irregular pattern, it becomes more challenging to continue the pattern and to replicate it. Okay, so now let's switch it. Here we have a regular pattern. It's very predictable. Yellow circle, red circle, yellow circle, red circle. But notice the rhythm. The rhythm has changed. We have a large space, a small space, a smaller space, an even smaller space, and then a really large space, and then no space at all. So again, if you think to the idea of music notes, if this was some sort of song that was being played, you'd have a larger pause between these notes, and then it would be a smaller pause. So it would seem as though the music's getting faster. Perhaps you'd have two notes from different instruments being played at the same time here, and then another pause. So it changes the entire way that the viewer captures the rhythm within an artwork, similar to music. Next example, irregular pattern, irregular rhythm. And it's just like you think. It's very difficult to predict how I would continue to draw this example beyond the video. So what color comes next? Where should I actually place that circle? Because it's hard to say. The rhythm is changing. All the spaces between the circles are different. When we have an irregular pattern combined with an irregular rhythm, it becomes a bit chaotic. It's difficult to follow. But remember, it still counts as a pattern because we have repetition. We have repetition, in this case, in the shapes, with the circles being repeated. Here are some words you can use to describe regular patterns and rhythms as opposed to irregular patterns and rhythms. Regular rhythms and patterns are very predictable. That means they're easy to know what comes next. They create a sense of calm because they're predictable. It doesn't involve much thinking. You know what's happening next. But also sometimes it's a little boring because there's nothing exciting. You just know what's going to happen. When we have irregular rhythms and irregular patterns, it's unpredictable. Again, if I asked you to continue to draw this pattern beyond the box, you might have a hard time doing so because it's hard to know exactly how the motif's going to look, what the spacing or the rhythm's going to be between the motifs. So we get this energy, this excitement that happens from an irregular rhythm or pattern because it gets your brain ignited. You have to try and solve a puzzle to think about what comes next. It also seems with irregular patterns and rhythms that there's movement, that there's things going in different directions, especially when there's irregular rhythms. The downside is it becomes a bit chaotic. So if you think about a place where you want to be calm, like hospitals, you're going to see a lot of regular patterns and rhythms, calming, predictable. This is not going to soothe anyone, okay? This is too chaotic, it's too unpredictable. So there's different purposes for the different rhythms and patterns. If we were to change the rhythm or the pattern gradually, we refer to this as a progressive rhythm or a progressive pattern. Again, it must be a gradual, or you can think of it as a slow change. When there's a slow change, okay, in the rhythm, so here we have spaces that are larger and you can see they're slowly getting narrower between our black rectangles. It creates a sense of movement. It actually appears as though the black rectangles are starting to move faster. The closer together you place your motifs, the quicker that you're able to follow along with your eye, so it creates this sense of a faster movement. The larger the gaps in between the motifs, or the larger the spaces for the rhythm, the slower or the longer it takes your eyes to move from one motif to the next, therefore creating a slower rhythm. So think about large spaces, slow rhythm. Small spaces, fast rhythm. So here you can see another example of a progressive rhythm, but we have a very regular pattern. The pattern, yeah, it's predictable. Dark pink, light pink, dark pink, light pink. But you'll notice the spacing between is gradually getting larger. It doesn't happen like this. It's happening slowly. So we're going from a really quick speed and we're slowing it down by creating larger gaps. Here we have a progressive pattern with a regular rhythm. So pretty uniform spacing, so a very strong example of a regular rhythm, but our pattern gradually changes. This makes it easy for the eye to follow because it's a nice slow shift. In this case, it's just a shift in the actual colors of the triangles. And here again is our combination. We have progressive rhythm and pattern. So we have a gradual change in our pattern, but also a gradual change in our rhythm. So lots of things to think about when you're creating your own examples of patterns and rhythms. I want you to take a moment to look at the next two slides and challenge yourself to see if you can determine what examples you're looking at. Is it a regular rhythm or a regular pattern? Is it irregular rhythm or irregular pattern? Is there a progression in the rhythm or the pattern? So see if you can determine with these two examples. And finally, with this example, see if you can determine what type of pattern is being used. To finish our lesson today, make sure you have enough examples in your sketchbook and you have them labeled so that you understand the difference between a regular pattern and a regular rhythm, an irregular pattern and an irregular rhythm, and a progressive pattern and a progressive rhythm. You should also know what a motif is, and you need to know that a pattern cannot exist without repetition. That's the key component that creates a pattern. Good luck with your next task.